Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in for the 4 o'clock show. 3 o'clock brought Speaker of the House Nick Mattiello with GoLocal CEO Josh Fenton. But now, as we usually do most Tuesday afternoons, we check in with Jennifer Lawless, Professor of Political Science down at the University of Virginia. Jennifer, how are you today?
I'm fine. How are you?
Just slightly outside the Beltway. We always used to say right inside, but clearly all the Beltway talk this week is centered around the nomination process and hearings for Brett Kavanaugh. Could any more wrenches be thrown in what's taken place in the last 48 to 72 hours?
It's hard to imagine. It seemed just a few days ago that the notion that there was this anonymous letter indicating that there had been some sort of sexual assault or attempted sexual assault was going to be enough of a bombshell to potentially derail the hearings. But once we actually found out the name of the woman and her willingness to testify and not only speak to the senators on the Judiciary Committee, but actually engage in a public hearing, although she hasn't confirmed the date yet, that pretty much threw the whole thing open. Kavanaugh apparently spent the day at the White House yesterday with appointment and confirmation lawyers. Mitch McConnell is obviously scrambling, and I think the Democrats have to be very careful about their next move.
And so let's talk about that next move. It sounded like, from a time frame standpoint, was it still that they were looking at Monday to have both Kavanaugh and his accuser before the committee?
They are still looking at Monday, although just a little while ago it became clear that some members of the Judiciary Committee believe that the FBI should be able to fully investigate the incident prior to the Judiciary Committee hearing. And so it's possible that that would lead to an additional delay.
Any sense in time frame? Do you think that that we'll see that step taken with the FBI?
I think that there's a decent chance that we'll go down that path. Of course, the problem right now is that the FBI is seen as a politicized arm of the government as well. And so the Republicans probably don't have much faith or much of an incentive to believe that they would carry out an impartial investigation. The question then becomes, well, are they able to do that in a way that quells Republicans' concerns and still allows the Democrats to highlight what they think are clear improprieties in, Judge Kavanaugh's background?
So clearly is in the hot seat right now, and as you said, the potential to have things scheduled for Monday and also for FBI to take a look at this as well. And if you're a betting person, Jennifer, does Kavanaugh make it to Monday?
I don't think so. I know that I'm probably not in the on the popular side of things right now, but my bet would be that he'll drop out before Monday for a couple of reasons. The first is that she seems to be a pretty credible witness. This is a person who has not contemporaneous notes of what happened, but who has shared the incident with people through the years. The second factor is that Kavanaugh lied about it, and we already have several Republican senators on the record saying that lying about it would be disqualifying, which means that if they believe that the incident occurred and that he was involved, they've basically put themselves on the record for disqualifying him. And third, we've already seen that it's a partisan circus. And so if Kavanaugh feels like there's a chance that he won't get confirmed, I think it'll be likely that he'll step back and say he's not going to put his family through this. Because remember, this is not the same era that Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas went head-to-head in front of the Judiciary Committee. We're in the middle of the Me Too movement right now, where public opinion is certainly on the side of supporting women who are making these kinds of allegations.
So if he doesn't make it to Monday, having gone through the process, of failed Supreme Court nominees, how is his career impacted after this?
I'm not sure that his career gets that much of an effect at all. He won't be on the Supreme Court. He would never again be named. I think the wild card is actually what happens in the United States Senate. Having Kavanaugh withdraw, I think in some ways helps the Republicans because they don't have to put their members on the record heading into what are competitive races in quite a few red states that are held by Republicans right now. The other upside is that Donald Trump and the administration can kind of take the high road on this one, which is somewhat ironic, but say that they're backing Kavanaugh's decision to withdraw and not suggest that they don't trust women or people who have been victims of this kind of behavior. And so I think it's actually a decent opportunity for them to hold the Senate. But obviously there's some sort of risk. And then is McConnell actually going to try to force through a new nominee during a lame duck session when that was exactly what he tried to avoid with Merrick Garlick's nomination.
And so, but you mentioned the political process, and if Kavanaugh doesn't make it through, how that sort of comes to the aid of Republicans. I mean, these candidates, I mean, what if they're faced with that question? I mean, they can clearly duck and weave it. It doesn't seem a viable question for them to be asked, would you have voted for Kavanaugh?
Right, and it actually gives them a lot of cover because they have to say something like they're able to say something like, look, I didn't have to make that decision because the process unfolded the way that it had. Republicans can still say that they support conservative nominees, that they believe that Roe versus Wade should be overturned, that they support the other people that were on Donald Trump's list, et cetera, et cetera. And so it actually gives them cover with their voters. There's no question that the next person, if Kavanaugh withdraws, will be conservative, right? We're not going to replace a Kavanaugh potential nomination with somebody who has a voting record or political profile of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It's just a matter of whether this person will also have some potential personal baggage that questions his integrity.
So because Kavanaugh's taking up all the oxygen down inside D.C. right now, one of the things that came to light yesterday was out of the Trump administration, the numbers of refugees to be allowed in the country was lowered from, I believe, 45,000 to 30,000. Is that correct?
That's right. So that's, a 33 percentage point cut. And that's kind of crazy. It sort of got into the news via a press release. Nobody was paying much attention. I saw the alert on my phone and I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. And it hardly has garnered any news coverage today because of the rest of this circus. And so I think that's pretty consistent with what the administration generally does when everything is sucked up by scandals or salacious details. They're pretty effective in pushing through the substantive policies that they promised on the campaign trail. And immigration reform, which is what they're calling this, is at the top of that list.
What else are we looking at inside the Beltway before we tack back up here? It's hard to believe we had you on last Wednesday and then the chips fell where they did after the primaries here. But what else down in D.C.?
Well, I mean, the other obvious issue right now is what Paul Manafort is going to say to anybody and what that's going to mean for Mueller's investigation. Now, we seem to be in this 8-week period right now, or I guess we're down to 7 weeks, where we're not going to hear much from the investigation because we're amid the midterm elections. But there's no question that work is still being done and interviews are still being conducted. And my sense is that even Republicans have acknowledged that Paul Manafort flipping is not good for the administration and is not good for Donald Trump because he's one of the only people who actually knows what happened in that Trump Tower meeting. And the early reports indicate that the proffer he was offered allow Mueller's team to ask him pretty much anything.
And I got to say, the time frame, when was the Manafort deal cut? Just several days ago. It seemed, again, mired in the Kavanaugh palooza.
Right. And, it's one of these things where the Kavanaugh hearings and the details surrounding them are new, and it's different players, and it's interesting, and it's like a shiny bauble. And unfortunately, I think we're losing sight of the fact that this man could potentially be confirmed and sit on the United States Supreme Court. And while we're all struck on focusing on this, a lot of other things are happening. So, this is the way that news works these days, and this is the way that the administration handles what's going on. But, it's about far more than just this one nomination.
So let's talk a little bit about Rhode Island. Gina Raimondo turned back Matt Brown last week. Cranston Mayor Alan Fung turned away Patricia Morgan. And then in the hotly contested lieutenant governor's race, incumbent Dan McKee held off Aaron Ruggenberg. So, kind of status quo held serve at the state level.
Status quo, except in the General Assembly, progressives had quite a number of victories. And the fact that the lieutenant governor's race was as close as it was, I think suggests a level of progressive energy and enthusiasm that we have seen in other states. The big issue, I think, is that Matt Brown was unable to defeat Gina Raimondo, which suggests that she's not seen as the establishment, right? She has a lot of progressive values. She holds quite a few progressive policy positions, and that kind of argument didn't necessarily work against her. But the fact that progressives did make headway in the General Assembly suggests that the trends we've seen across the country are happening in Providence and around the state as well.
It will be interesting to see. We have seen some outspoken House members already say that they are not supportive of current Speaker Nicholas Mattiello, who was just in here talking with Josh about his own race coming up and the prospects for next year. Just the day after the election, there was some infighting here amongst progressives themselves. I'm not sure if you saw a close ally of Representative Ruggenberg's, who he had started the Providence Student Union with, chided those progressives who opted to side with Matt Brown, ostensibly giving them their time and energy as opposed to backing the progressives with the bona fides. Now, we've talked about this before. You know, Matt Brown was Secretary of State back in '06, but to any of these 20-somethings, the name recognition wasn't necessarily there. He did have a lot of youth and a lot of support, but there were also some that to them, they didn't know him from those days here, nor his work with Global Zero. You know, you've been watching the races around the country. This has turned into an issue of folks who are, you know, not to say cherry-picking races, but, you know, sort of come in when they haven't been necessarily around or around at all or for a long time.
That's right. And, you know, I think it's because there seems to be this general current of sweeping progressives into office or allowing them to run in primaries on the Democratic side where they might not typically be viable, and the environment suggests that they are. The problem, of course, is that voters wind up voting for and volunteers wind up working for the candidates who recruit them or reach out to them or resonate most with them. And so while political operatives often are able to strategize or suggest that because a candidate entered the race, he actually took support away from somebody else who was close, that kind of sophisticated calculus tends not to work on the people that just want to go knock on doors because they're inspired because candidate X is running for office. And so, you know, I sympathize with the overall message that some of these races are taking away money, volunteer hours, and potentially votes from other races. But, you know, we have a country with 500,000 elected offices, and electoral competition is generally a good thing. So it's hard to begrudge the people that have gotten out to support candidates, even when those candidates might not have had that big a shot.
And finally, Jennifer, one of the national pubs, Governing Magazine, changed the outlook here in Rhode Island just this week from leans Democrat to a toss-up. Now, they seem to have the sense, obviously, of Fung being a strong contender, as well as knowing that there's third-party candidates in the race. Do you see, is there a path to victory for Fung with Trillo being in the race?
Sure, there's always a path. He is a very strong candidate, and he's very, very likable. And I don't think we should underestimate him on those dimensions. Rhode Island also, as we all know, has a history of electing Republicans as governor, so it's not out of the question. That said, it's hard to imagine that Trillo's voters wouldn't be otherwise voting for Fung. And so it becomes very, very difficult unless Fung is able to make the case that it really is a two-person race and that any vote cast for Trillo is ultimately a vote cast for Raimondo. And we know from political science and from history that that's a tough message to send.
Well, we're continuing to keep an eye moving forward. The commercials have already been out fast and furious between Fung, Raimondo, and more as we look towards November. And Jennifer Lawless, appreciate your giving us the lay of the land, the prediction that Brett Kavanaugh might not make it to Monday. So we look forward to talking with you next week here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back with our next guest here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center.